Forsaken's an interesting subject because you're notable for writing the very well-received endings for both Altair and Ezio. And now you get to finally write your own assassin, and before you can even introduce us to him, he's killed off in this book, right? It's kind of an interesting little turnaround. We had many top-rated questions, kind of part of why I want to address it first here, about Edward and Forsaken. Why don't we start with this one, which was the highest voted one, which asks, this is from Christ Summary. Some of these names I'm never going to be able to get.
Chrysamir?
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, that's probably closer. And they asked, Darby, how closely did you work with Oliver Bowden? Were you happy with the way Edward's death was handled in Forsaken? Do you feel like it limited you at all?
Yeah, the short answer would be yes, a little bit limiting, just because, well, let me back up, actually. Yes, I did work with him. That's actually a pen name, by the way, but we're not going to reveal his real name. This Forsaken was obviously created during the creation of AC3, and so Corey was heavily involved. Black Flag was just coming into fruition. We were kind of, figuring out, getting our footing and things, and so Corey really helped shape that one, but I was brought in to just kind of give some small shape to Edward. I can't remember who had decided that Edward should be dead. It might have been Corey. It might have been just the group of us as a whole. Maybe Jean. At the time that this was happening, Jean was the brand director. The sort of in charge of the overarching narrative of the series. So I can't really remember, but I know that one of the reasons we wanted him to die at that point was because it wouldn't have made sense that he didn't appear in AC3 at all. AC3's script was already done, and it was undergoing maybe some revisions, but there was no real room to stuff in Edward as well. But we also knew, because we were coming around to the idea of having Edward have his own game, giving Edward his own game, it was probably best to just let his story end there so that I would have free reign to just take it where it needed to go. That being said, so yeah, we decided he would die at about age 44, 45, and that would set Haytham off on his journey at a young age. I know that some fans are now, having played Black Flag, you're like, how could Edward die with 2 Templar agents? I was like, I just suppose you have to imagine that they're really well-trained Templar agents. I'd actually asked Oliver to give Edward, at the end of the book, once he goes back to England, to get him in a scuffle that gave him a really terrible wound that kind of injured his leg, so that it sort of reduced his faculty for fighting. I just was like, I know fans are gonna be sad that it seems like he went out, went out like that. On the other hand, where Assassin's Creed toes the line between being this story about these sort of historical superheroes, they're walking around in hoods and capes and things. And so there's this impression that they're the most ultimate badass fighters of all time. And sometimes that rubs a little against the idea of these being grounded historical stories about the, cultures and the people that make those cultures live and breathe. And so I don't find it too upsetting if a beloved character dies in a slightly accidental way or an unfortunate way. I remember even when we killed off Ezio in Embers, I had a hard time with people who were like, "Oh, Ezio should have gone out with 10,000 guys surrounding him, and he should have shouted at the top of his lungs, Sophia, this is for you." It's I don't want to write superheroes, and I don't think it's a bad thing if somebody dies by accident or of a disease, or it's we're trying to write stories about real people with extraordinary talents. But if you want to live in a world where heroes always win and villains always get their due, I don't know, maybe Assassin's Creed's not the brand for you, not the series for you. But so in terms of being limiting, it was a little bit, because as I started writing the story, once I finally got down to writing the story, which was, I'd say a couple months after Forsaken came out, I started seeing a few like things that I wished I could have changed, and it wasn't even actually related to his death. It was related to the structure of his family with Caroline and Jenny and Hatham and Tessa,
Yep.
and that made it a bit difficult to do some of the things we wanted to do. I won't get into it's very writerly things, very boring structural things that I wanted to do differently. So I found myself fighting against that a little bit. There was a time very, very early on where I wanted to have Edward carrying around a lock of Caroline's hair that she'd given him before he left. And then he would at some point realize that, or think maybe hair had the right sort of DNA in it to activate the observatory.
Yeah.
Which would only work if the follicle was still alive, but whatever. And so he would use the lock of hair in the observatory, and he would see through her eyes, and he would see his daughter that way.
Oh.
And he would look like, holy crap, I have a daughter back in England. But then if we'd done that, then it would be really weird. Like, okay, now I got to go on all these assassination missions. Like we would.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, back to like pirating.
So that idea got dropped fairly early. It would have been a cool one, I think. But also because I wasn't always confident that the presentation of the observatory, how when we actually see through Jack Rackham's eyes and then Woodes Rogers' eyes, the presentation is pretty hazy. Like you can't really make out a whole lot of detail.
Sure.
So I was worried early that wouldn't come across well, and I think I was right. It didn't have quite look the way that I wanted to. So I'm actually glad we changed that plot point.
Okay.
But yeah, that's the short answer is yeah. It is a bit limiting when you decide the end of a story before you've written the beginning and the middle.
Sure. Yeah.
Unless you're M. Night Shyamalan, then maybe that's how you work.
Sure. Yeah, it's clear that this is weighing on the minds of a lot of fans who have read Forsaken and played AC4. And from my perspective too, I was also like, from the fans' point of view, a little disappointed in Edward's death. But I've thought about it a lot, and I've thought about the things you said too, because it is a more realistic way of portraying it. I mean, you plow through these games, you kill hundreds of guards, but realistically, these are even men at their physical peak. A 2-on-1 or 3-on-1 fight would probably very easy. It's very possible and likely that they would just, slip up, get stabbed, get infected, and die or something.
Yeah.
So I think from my perspective as a fan, and this is partially your fault, Darby, is because if you look at like the endings of Altair and Ezio, they feel very appropriate. Altair dies in service of the Creed, which he had been serving his whole life, born into. Ezio, kind of. The circumstances of his death are still up for debate, of course, but like,
yes.
At the end of the day, he's with his family in Florence, and just it feels appropriate. Edward, it's just like two. It's kind of just like two random thugs almost. I mean, not thugs. It's a trained Templar people, but like they're not really that important. And he's really, I'd read Forsaken before playing AC4, before knowing that he would become this important character, and he really felt like just one of these characters that's like in a whole bunch of other stories where they're just. It's the father's death, family member, close friend, whatever, death that spurs the protagonist on and sets him like, they're just there to serve. Like it felt like he was just a character there to serve Hatham's like story. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's the hindsight 2020 thing because it's like, I don't think the writer, you say here how it works with the writer of the novels is that we just give them an outline and they get to go off and write their whole thing. And then they have control over the actual sort of execution of it. We just give them an outline of what needs to happen. So I don't think it would have been terrible had Edward died the same way, but perhaps with hindsight, because now we know Edward's full personality, it would have been better to present that death in a better way, to give it give him a better send off. Obviously, he dies off screen and whatever. So yeah, but it's hard to tell because I didn't write the ending of AC4 until probably almost 2 years after Forsaken was written. So it's hard. It's hard. We've certainly rewritten, or I actually sometimes think endings are okay if you present them differently. Were we able to go back and show you that scene where he died, then you could then you could say goodbye properly. It's the same thing with Desmond and AC3. Some people aren't sad the way what happened. They're just a bit sad at how it was presented.
Yes.
And I've seen that fan do that cool edit. It was like a montage flashback edit of, from all the points, and that's a proper way to present a goodbye to somebody. So maybe oftentimes the story isn't it's not what you tell, but how you tell it, and that the difference between a good ending and a bad ending is just in presentation, perhaps. I don't know.
Yeah, that's very true. Well, so speaking of the ending, one of our other questions is from Mr. Travis24 from Pennsylvania, who asks, if you had the choice to make a second ending and decide the fate of Edward, what would it be? And I think there's a little bit of implied, like, I'm not super happy with the current ending in this question.
No,
but yes.
I wouldn't change how he died. I just probably would have. That book is from Haytham's perspective as a 10-year-old, so it's kind of hard to think that he would have any more insight into what happened, especially not knowing that he was an assassin at the time, nor did he ever know that he was a pirate until maybe later. Jenny might have told him.
Yep.
But it's hard to say. What I think would have been cool is if we could actually somehow show that moment from another angle. Maybe, for all we know, what if Templars through Birch, what if they poisoned him ahead of time and he was under the influence of a horrible poison or intoxicant while he was fighting, Maybe they laid the groundwork for this assault by poisoning this master assassin. I don't know.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't have done anything differently. I would just take the opportunity to tell Edward's story, not Haytham's story, from that point of view.
Okay, so we have one more question regarding Forsaken. This one is from, I think it's Pakundo from Israel, I believe, and they say the character of Edward is portrayed in a different way in the novels Forsaken and Black Flag by Oliver Bowden. What do you think of the differences between Edward in the game and Edward in the novels, particularly from game ending to his death? Now, I haven't read the AC4 novelization, just the Forsaken part, but I'm not sure. So I can't speak exactly to what he's referring to for that, but if you have any thoughts on this question.
Yeah, I haven't read Forsaken in a long time, so I can't even really remember. I probably wrote it 2.5 years ago when it was first being written, but or I guess is that 1.5 years ago? Yeah, I don't know. No, 2 years ago.
Probably 2 years ago.
And the book for Black Flag, it's spoiler for you.
No problem.
It tells a story about 5 years before Edward goes off to be a pirate. So it really shows how he met Caroline and how he his kind of standing in life clashed with Caroline's sort of middle class family, and the book kind of implies that there's some shenanigans behind Caroline's father's business. And then when Edward comes back from England to quote fix what he mangled back home, he finds out that this guy, Caroline's father, was always kind of second fiddle to or he was employed by a Templar, and he was always just sort of a yes man. He wasn't a Templar himself, but he worked for a business that was run by them. And Caroline had been betrothed to the son of one of these Templars, and at some point, and so Edward, now with eyes wide open, is like, holy crap, this whole sort of conspiracy thing was going on under my nose, or just outside my reach before I left England. And so the book has these sort of bookend things where he comes back and he chases this guy down and learns why Caroline died, and she sort of died because of neglect. She got very ill at one point, and her father sort of didn't give her the treatment she needed because he was scared of various repercussions. I can't quite remember how it goes, but so the one thing I think because there's so much in the Black Flag game, and then the book tries to do some of that, but then also tell its own story. I think the book cut out a lot of the lighter moments of the game. And then Forsaken, I mean, that's 10 years later, so we can imagine that Edward has grown up a little bit and things like that. I don't really know how to address that question, though, because it's not fresh in my mind.
Yeah. So he says particularly from game ending to his death, which is pretty much Forsaken, I think.
Yeah, well,
and so
sort
so
of.
the book also goes from a little past the game ending, I guess. Well, he said he comes back, I guess, right? And he finds out.
Well, the game, other than the little Easter egg with Hatham, the game really ends in 22 at the end of 1722, and then Edward dies in what 35?
Yeah, 35.
Right?
Yeah.
Right. So and I think Forsaken only covers when Hatham's like 8 to 10. So there's still a good almost 10 years of Edward's life that we haven't really covered, or 8 or so. But he sheds his rougher ways and tries to and works with the assassins in England or the UK.
Yeah.
And that's a part of the story we haven't told. And that 8 years right there could be its own amazing story.
Sure.
I'd always wondered if we could do a DLC or something that sent him back out on the high seas to follow some of the more vicious pirates of the era. There's a guy named Ned Lowe, or Edward Lowe, another Edward, who is probably the most vicious pirate that I have ever read about in this era. But he operated mostly around India and Africa, and he was the guy he actually cut a guy's lips off and fried them in a pan and fed them back to him to torture him.
Wow.
And that's where I actually got the line, Edward's line, "I'd rather not cut your lips off and feed him to you." I knew that I wouldn't get Ned Lowe into the game, so I at least used his tactic.
Okay.
But I have no idea actually what we have some little ideas about what Edward's doing, and if he's kicking around London, or does he go elsewhere? Does he run missions for the assassins? I don't know. But he's from let's say 1723 or so. He's an official assassin working with the UK branch Brotherhood, and he's an assassin all the way up until he dies. So that part of the story, that's kind of open, and maybe one day we'd imply stuff in there. I don't know. But that's a pretty good chunk of time to do some cool stuff.
Yeah, and it could explain any differences. I reread the parts involving Edward from Forsaken before this podcast. It doesn't really feel that out of. It's hard when this question isn't a little more specific about exactly what is different. I feel like the biggest kind of interaction you get with him that's kind of interesting is when there's a mugger who tries to go after Tessa's jewelry, and Birch, chases the guy down and is about to pretty much kill him, and Edward stops him. Yeah. And then later on, he asks Hatham, what would you do in this situation? And I think it's not really that out of line necessarily with how Hatham's progressed, even by the end of AC4. He's used to be very reckless, and but you see him displaying a little more restraint and kind of. So I think, I don't know. I think it's open to interpretation, and if there are any differences, I think there is a lot of time that could easily account for him being within the assassin order, where he's matured even more.
Yeah, Edward probably has a lot of sensitivities to the sort of the certain criminal elements. And the other thing too is like we've always had, since AC2, we had a pickpocket mechanic.
Yeah.
Assassins can go rob people too. So, and they work with mercenaries and, things like that. So it's very, very, that's probably Birch's natural sort of Templar tendencies coming out. Like, I want to beat the stuffing out of this guy who's clearly, pawn scum or whatever. And Edward's like, hey.
I was pickpocketing all of the Templars in their meeting about the observatory.
Yes, exactly.
I love that optional objective, by the way. I was like, this is brilliant.
That was my
totally
idea.
Imagine Edward just being like, oh yes, this is all really interesting. Boop, boop, boop.
I had that idea because I'm a big believer in always giving players something to do with their fingers while exposition is happening. Although when it's very, very important exposition, it should probably be a cutscene or some kind. But that was my idea. I asked. I said, hey, they're all going to be staring at a table. Is it possible that we give the player Edward control? And let you pickpocket all the Templars? And that actually became. I didn't know that was going to be the constraint. Pickpocket all the Templars. I kind of wish it wasn't, because I wish that people would have like figured it out. And like played with it. But I don't know that we'd even taught you pickpocketing at the time. So people who who hadn't played a game before would not have figured it out.
So I do want to talk about the modern day aspect of AC4. I'm kind of surprised. I don't think I really saw many community questions here because I have lots of questions. I guess just on a high level, it's obviously a very different format from the previous games. I have a quote here from one of my favorite quotes from the Polygon review of AC4. Let's make some good back-of-the-box quotes here. They also introduced some of the most bizarre meta-narrative I've seen in a game. It details the game's studio wrecked with paranoia and the quest for the next big thing, beholden to arbitrary human resource policies and long hours. I almost wondered if it was really a hidden in plain sight cry for help from the developers. Just really, I had a lot of fun seeing like the various reactions to the modern day, like in all the different reviews, because everyone had a different take on it. And personally, I enjoyed it. I know, we talked earlier at PAX, after the game was announced, you were talking about how we're moving away from Desmond type things to more self-contained stories. And that definitely, I get that feeling here, because even with the reveal of John from IT, like his stuff is wrapped up, like he's shot, he's dead. Like,
yes.
I mean,
his body, his body's.
Well, yeah, it's true. Abstergo has his body and his blood, but because you play as yourself, and you've hinted before, I think in the AC Initiates Q&A, or maybe somewhere else, that in future games you would be playing as yourself, but not the same person you were in AC4. Is that correct? Type thing. I don't know how much.
No. See, this is actually something Jean and I were really surprised at. The present day player is just you. You are right. You're not playing a character, and but then we get that question all the time, like who am I? Who am I? Who am I?
Yeah. Well, so I mean, if you play as yourself in a similar fashion in the next game, do you expect that? It's kind of a weird setup, right?
Yeah.
Because you have knowledge that your person in the game doesn't, even though it's supposed to be you. And so it's like, does that person have knowledge of all the Abstergo stuff? Is it the same? If we could pan out and look, is it supposed to be you have moved on from Abstergo Entertainment to go to somewhere else or do something else and blah, blah, blah. And it seems like that's probably not, like it's going to be the story told from kind of perspectives.
Actually,
perspective.
No, I actually think that it actually could probably work that way. I can't obviously talk about the future, but
sure, yeah, I know, I'm just trying to.
There's a couple things. The main thing is that with initiates, especially, the present day is now an ongoing thing. So
right.
It would be very, very hard to create an ongoing story where every single present jumped forward a year and then another year, or even if we pause for 2 years or 3 years even at some point, that present day is supposed to be ongoing. So there's no comfortable sense in which a writer could say, like, here's Black Flag and here's the present, and you have a third person character, and now once that's over, let's pause and let's jump forward a year, and now it's December of 2014, and now it's December of 2015. We wanted to create a present day where the world was now a living, breathing universe, and whenever you happen to jump into it is about when it takes place. And of course, people will play Black Flag for years to come, probably, but
right.
It's still, we want that kind of sense that if you play the game in the first couple of months that it comes out, you are participating in the story as it happens. And then we pull you out, and then whenever the next game comes out, you jump back in, you participate in it, and then you jump back out. That's part of it. The other thing was that by limiting it to a Desmond-like character, it's just very hard as a writer to continually come up with those reasons for, like, you're going back into the Animus again, you're going back into the Animus again, you're going back into the Animus again. Even Desmond started to make fun of that by AC3. He's like, yeah, I know, back in the Animus.
Turns out you have another like Grandmaster Assassin. That's not the right term for it. Mentor Assassin.
Yeah.
Who also had a piece of Eden that we need to find in the present day.
Exactly.
Like, it started to get a little
exactly
contrived almost.
And so by decoupling the story from a third-person character. There's also the question of, if I have to use an animus to play Ezio or Connor or Edward, who is playing Desmond? And of course even before fans figured out, of course we were thinking like, oh, should you wake up as Desmond's son or daughter in the future and be a total twist? And of course that was thrown around. We threw around every possible like scenario, like should we end it the way we intended to end it, or should we just throw him another twist? I don't know. And in the end, we decided to just stick with pretty much what we knew, or what we had planned. But every single idea was thrown out there. Just like I think Vince Gilligan just said they had like 5 Breaking Bad endings planned at some point, and they sort of hit on the last one, whatever one they did. Because when you're working on these games for years and years, you come up with it's like, should we do it this way? And you always want to throw curveballs.
Sure.
You always want to tip it on its head, just to sort of give yourself something exciting to react to for the next one or whatever. But I strayed from the point a little bit. Oh yeah, so the third person character. So because the AC3 caught up with 2012, Black Flag is the first game to take place in real time, so to speak. And we just didn't feel like it would be a good idea to come up with a new protagonist and a new problem.
Sure.
So we want from now on, we want the Assassins and the Templars to feel like they're talking to you. They're trying to engage you, just like they were in Black Flag. You're this lowly employee, and you're working for Templars, and even Olivier and Melanie don't really know what's going on with Templars. They just happen to get a paycheck. But the Assassins contact you, and we designed that in such a way so that you also felt like a pirate, like you were playing both sides in some sense, just like Edward was, although you were kind of reluctantly doing so. So thematically, that was a decision I made to present the present day story in that way, or at least to have the plot be that, so you could also feel like you were caught between Assassins and Templars. I think. Yeah. I don't know what you thought about John from IT, but like I don't know if you thought he was a Templar by the time he started yelling at you, or if you thought that he was something else.
Oh, well, my girlfriend actually figured out that she was like, he's a sage. Like, and I was like, fuck, you're right. So I was like,
I'm curious how many people figured that out. I
was quite impressed. I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah, that's good. I don't think it's very obvious, but
yeah, no, I don't think.
And the cool thing is, it's Oliver doing both voices, but he's very British, but he's doing a Welsh accent. He's English, but he's doing a Welsh accent for Bart and doing an American kind of accent for Bart. So he doesn't actually get to use his real accent for either role.
Yeah. I don't know. So this is what worries me as a fan. Like, it's starting to get, and maybe you can quell my fears on this, but it's starting to get like a little weird, like just this shifting perspective or whatever. It's like
it's starting to get weird.
Starting to get weird. Okay, even just to like kind of keep track of kind of how things are, because like for example, AC3 had multiplayer component where you are playing you as well, and you are being talked to by Erudito.
Yes.
Like if you unlock the final Erudito video, they're like talking to you and they're like, hey, we'll be in touch, like, in their spooky voice and everything. And then I come to AC4 and I'm like being talked to by, Rebecca and Sean and all these other people. But that me is a different me from the other one, who is a different me from the one who is playing multiplayer in Brotherhood and Revelations, which was then retconned to be actually
Otto.
Otso or whatever.
Yeah.
Otso Berg or whatever. And it's just like, and that if you
let's
play initiates, right?
Let's put it this way. Anytime you put in a new Assassin's Creed game from here on out, we're giving you a role to play. So we're letting you sort of be an actor in this particular piece.
So that's what I figured.
Yeah.
But then I kind of feel like what worries me is that I feel like it's almost like that actor's part in AC4 is done. And it's almost like you almost don't really feel the sense of progression. Like if I accomplish something great in AC5 or whatever is next or whatever, and maybe it builds off the actions of the guy from AC4, but maybe it just feels disjointed a little bit.
Yeah,
maybe that was kind of, you know what I mean?
Well, yes, we've had long discussions about this, but we know, for instance, we have little ideas for when modern day storylines will end, but the entire series as a whole doesn't really have an ending.
I was going to ask you about that too, because there were a lot of headlines this summer about something Ash said.
Ash was referring to the current sort of
to this arc, right?
This current Juno / exactly. People, that was kind of not a non-story that got built up into a story.
Yeah, I saw that and I'm like, I'm pretty sure that's not what they meant to say and how it meant to be interpreted.
We really approached this story like, and some people hate me for this, but it's like Doctor Who, you know. There are season arcs, you know, but the universe that Doctor Who exists in doesn't ever need an ending. Doctor Who will always have, you know, his enemy in the Master. I don't know if you watch Doctor Who, but he's got his various enemies like the Cybermen and the Daleks and the Master. They reoccur throughout, you know, episodes. Sometimes there's one-shot episodes that just deal with some random thing off to the side, and sometimes and so we really want people to get away from this notion that we're thundering towards an ending. We want the Assassin Templar conflict in the present day to feel like an ongoing swirl of conflicts, just like as you think in, like, I don't know, have you ever watched The Wire?
Yeah,
you know, like nobody watches The Wire and thinks, oh, I can't wait till the cops defeat drug dealers.
Right.
You know, it's going to be an ongoing conflict forever. The assassin conflict has been going on since Adam and Eve or earlier, right? Or Cain and Abel, actually, since that time, and it will go on. And I'm actually surprised sometimes when people say, like, oh, I just want the assassins to defeat the Templars. I'm like, I was like, how would that happen? They're two philosophies. You don't destroy philosophies.
Ideas are bulletproof, right?
Yeah, we've seen that with religions in the real world. We've seen that with philosophies, economic philosophies. The philosophies don't die immediately just because one guy died, or the head of Abstergo, you know, Alan Rickon, whoever he is. We've never seen his face.
Right, yeah.
You know, like, and so I'm always surprised when fans expect to kind of like, I kill the boss and it's over. That's not how Assassin's Creed has ever presented its main conflict. We certainly have had villains, but the philosophies, especially if you want this moral ambiguity, these philosophies are not going to go away, and the philosophy and the people who believe in them will always be butting heads. And I think that's good, because we want to be able to go to any point in history, and we want to be able to, you know, I know that I'm not going to be cavalier about it and say that that's not frustrating for some people. And I know that some people, what's frustrating for me, of course, is when I read a fan comment and they go, the AC4's story was BS because nothing happened. I think, well, that's not right. But what that tells me is that is a guy who's really into the modern day. And we have all kinds of fans. Maybe is that a strength of our brand or a weakness? That lots of people like it for different reasons. Lots of people like it for the historical tourism. Lots of people like it for the sci-fi modern day. Lots of people like the precursor race. Some people just hate them and think they're the worst idea we've ever done. And there is no right answer to these things. But we are doing our best to treat them all at the proper proportion. You know, because I like the historical parts the best, but I do love this sort of sneaky utility of the animus, and I love the conspiratorial stuff and all that. So the present day is fun, and it really serves as a wrapper to everything. But the thing is, we needed to expand the present day in a way and almost simplify it in a way so that we always had new reasons to go into the past, you know, not just like you said, like, hey, you need to go find another piece of Eden in the past. Okay. I had an idea a long time ago that nobody's taken up, but maybe one day. And my favorite idea for the present is to open with a bunch of kids breaking into Abstergo, and you're one of them. And it's just you happen to know a kid whose dad works at Abstergo, and they break in at night and with a couple 6-packs of beer, and they go on joyrides on the Animuses. And so the idea would be that they just dial up random time periods, and go like, "Hey, I'm gonna go back into the Middle Ages, or I'm gonna go to the this, then that, and this and that," and that would be the tutorial sections where they're just like, "Hey, I'm in the body of an acrobat in the 1860s at Barnum and Bailey's first circus." I don't know. Whenever that Barnum and Bailey's was created, but and then you'd have this fun level that had nothing to do with anything, but it was joyriding in the Animus, and then at some point they stumble across an Assassin Templar conflict, and that's when the proper story begins.
Oh, interesting.
But see, that's the kind of thing. Like we as writers and creators, we want to be able to try out lots of different ideas, and if you anchor the present day story to a single person, then you have to do justice to that character's arc. And you can't try all these wild and fun ideas that you might come up with.
So we talked a little bit about kind of this, how everything's pinned to the present day in real time now, in the modern day. But since Assassin's Creed games are yearly releases, you fill the gaps basically now with AC Initiates, correct?
Yeah.
Pretty much. So for those who don't know, acinitiates.com, you can interact with kind of the present day world and do all this fun stuff. But I'm kind of curious what you think about this. It's almost like a I don't know if it's fair to call it a transmedia thing, Initiates, but it's this kind of thing where you have content, that's not in the main path of the game, right? It's like all the really important things that happen in the Assassin's Creed world generally kind of need to happen in the yearly releases for the big titles. And we've seen in the past, things like how Lucy's betrayal got pushed to the DLC, and then I'm sure a lot of people in AC3 were like, what? When the character's just kind of like, oh yeah, and you know how Lucy was a Templar, and everyone was like, when did that happen? Type stuff. And I feel like there's always this balance to be struck with all these side projects. As much as I love them, it's like you want to make their content important enough that it's worthwhile you feel like you're getting something out of it if you buy it or partake in it, but you also don't want to make it so important that when you introduce it into the main story, or if it's not even in the main game, people are missing out on it, right?
But this feeds back into not having a Desmond character too. One thing that I was absolutely adamant about in our game was that I wanted, as small as it was, I wanted the present day to have a beginning, middle, and end, so that if you came into it, your story started, it got complicated, and then it ended. And now, of course, there's still questions left over, but that you felt like you lived through a tiny little short story at least.
Yes.
And so I think the goal of any present day in an AC going forward is that in order to avoid this feeling left out of the story or feel like you missed a big moment, was that we just have to focus on making the stories self-contained as much as they can. And so that the goal would be to say, if somebody was a huge Initiates fan and they were slowly approaching the release of a new AC game, they kind of felt like, oh, I know what's coming up. I feel like I know where this is heading. And then boom, the game comes and lots of cool stuff happens. And then you at least by having interacted with Initiates, you were like, yeah, I felt the lead up to this. Then the game itself was its own story. And now once the game's over, I move on and I get to follow this story on into the future. But each game needs to feel like it has a self-contained narrative, so that people who aren't interested in Initiates or whatever, they still have some kind of experience that makes sense.
I guess just from my perspective as a fan, it's starting to feel slightly overwhelming, especially since you don't have this kind of, throughout the Desmond arc, you had kind of a few it felt like it was very much building towards, both, you had the solar flare issue and you also had the Abstergo Eye, kind of very clear objectives. And now you have the threat of Juno, but it's not clear how much of a threat she is because she's just gathering power. And it's not clear kind of what things are building towards. And so it's almost hard for me to kind of figure out what's important to keep track of. I mean, if you read Brahmin, I'm not really going to spoil too much of Brahmin, but there's a piece of Eden in it that has very it seems like it has very big implications for the future of the series. And then I don't know how much I miss out if I don't interact on initiates a lot, especially since these gaps are taking place in between the main games.
Well, we've dropped hints, but there's going to be a concerted effort to establish that next big goal. But I'm not going to get too much into that. But yeah, exactly. Okay. Like you said, like the end. So what everything was culminating towards in the Desmond cycle was the end of the world, right? Let's stop this.
Yeah.
But even like there was also the Abstergo thing about launching a satellite that kind of got sidelined a little bit.
Yeah.
Yes.
It got sidelined and then resolved in an email. It's like, oh yeah, what happened to that? Oh yeah, we took care of it. Like,
yeah.
Don't worry about that plot point anymore.
Oh.
Yeah.
But we very much saw Black Flag as a way to crossfade between Desmond. There's a lot of stuff. Obviously, if you hack it all the stuff,
right?
We say goodbye to Desmond in a kind of epilogue way, But there's also lots of hints as to where the series will go in terms of plot. But I think you don't have to worry if we. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Sure.
We'll establish something. Don't worry about it.
Okay. Great. Because I just feel like the current game builds up a lot of structure that feels like it's necessary.
What we wanted to do with Black Flag was just introduce a few new elements and put them in their proper place, so that once we moved on to the future, you say, okay, I feel I understand what's happening now. So the introduction of the Sage. And the introduction of Juno and clarifying what Juno was.
Yeah, the observatory.
The observatory is actually, well, I'll just say this, it's the blood vials that are actually more important.
Oh, the ones that got stolen.
Yeah, but not necessarily because they got stolen, but because of what we talk about. I'd say this, the observatory is not as important because it's kind of technology that in the modern age we've caught up to. We can't quite see through people's eyes yet, but we have enough surveillance equipment that
it's very timely.
Yes, Abstergo. Exactly. That's actually why I started writing that. I mean, the whole Snowden thing hadn't even happened yet, but I was trying to make some kind of game about surveillance, and I think we were going to have a few more like hacking, sort of camera hacking puzzles in the present day in an earlier version where you were constantly spying on people, but those got scaled back a little bit.
Sure.
But that was one of the goals behind it, was like this whole idea of surveillance. Like the Templars wanted to have a surveillance device in the past so they could spy on kings and emperors and keep tabs on them. And
So it's kind of interesting you say that it's actually not that important in the present day, but when you're playing the game, the people from Abstergo Industries are like, drop everything and tell us everything you know about the observatory and where it is and everything.
Yes, but only because of what's in it.
But the blood vials were stolen.
Yeah, but they didn't know that yet. They hadn't reached the end of that story.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So you mean like if we saw any further emails, like hypothetically, they'd be like, oh, by the way, we found out that someone took the blood vials by the time Edward came back, and then they'd be like, shit.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Okay, got it.
Yeah, I'm sure they want to go find the observatory too.
Sure, it's not totally useless. But
they like pieces of Eden. Yeah. Actually, well, let me point to one, because there's one hacked piece of information that I'm gathering now from you saying what you're saying that is important, but you don't even realize it's important. And it's actually there's an Abstergo preliminary advertisement where they're storyboarding an advertisement, and it's encouraging people to donate their blood. And it even has the image of a blood vial. It says "Donate today." So, like, those are kind of things like hints as to what Abstergo is like going to really focus on. And okay,
cool. Yeah, I do remember that now. I do remember seeing that. Okay.
Yeah, I love that we put that in there, but everyone what they want to talk about is like, where's the next game going to be set?
Oh yeah,
because I got that email.
That email, yeah. I love that Polygon review because it does. All of these seem to recognize that it seems like it was a lot of fun to write the modern
so
day
fun.
stuff, and obviously like a lot of shift around names, like your Christopher Darby and the emails, your middle name and
Yeah.
first name, and I see like Evan Dean, like Dean Evans, the Far Cry 3 Blood Dragon creative director and stuff, and like I'm sure all these other names and stuff, and just going back and forth, and like, oh, we're gonna set it like here are some possible like scenarios, like Egypt, French Revolution, like. Summer of Love from The Simpsons. Which is awesome.
I think what people don't realize though is that we were just holding up a mirror, like all those settings. We didn't really pick them because we wanted to hint at where we were going next. We picked them because although we may, who knows, but we picked them because these were like the top 7 that everyone asks for.
Yeah, feudal Japan, like all this.
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
exactly. Yeah,
exactly. And of Summer of Love, that of course was a
that
Simpsons
was
reference. But yes, I had a lot of fun writing that. That was probably the thing I wrote the fastest too. I think it was late and I was just like banged it out in 25 minutes.
Copy paste some emails from work and then replace some names and you're done.
Exactly. But yes, that was fun. We're trolling people.
Awesome. So I have one random question for my own curiosity about Olivier. Who disappears, and I think I saw you mention, maybe it was in the Initiates Q&A or something else, that it was John from IT that got rid of him. Like, is that?
I don't know. I don't know. I'm not gonna say too much.
Okay, it wasn't clear to me if that was supposed to be an open-ended like mystery, or if it was something that we should know the answer to.
All I leave you with is that the assassins get his name and figure out he's going to Chicago, and that's where it ends.
Okay.
So. He disappears after that, so who knows?
Oh, okay. All right then. All right, so we're not supposed to know what happened to him.
No.
Okay.
No. Maybe one day in the future.
Okay, we can add it to the list of mysteries to resolve by the end of the series, right? The end of the series in quotes, of course.
Yeah.
Okay, great. That quells. I mean, I did enjoy the modern day a lot, except I got a little tired of the Frogger minigame. But it was a very refreshing change of pace, and I do enjoy kind of just the wealth of information that we got out of it. I'm glad you're able to kind of quell some of my worries about the overall structure and where things are going with the modern day. But
I mean, yeah. Keep in mind, like when we make these games, the historical part is where we want to sink our teeth.
Sure.
But we also like the idea that they are all connected somehow.
Yeah.
And that's where the modern day comes in. But I do think that one thing, and that people will, some people will say like, oh, that's not what I wanted to hear. But maybe I've already said this and I'm repeating it. But just because I realize what a big a shift in priority it is when we say like, the Desmond thing's over and that style of story presentation is over. The present day is a fantastic bookend or wrapper, or to make all these games be in the same series, to bring them all together in the same world and have them ongoing. But if you were to visit the Ubisoft for a week and see how we make our games, you would see everybody just sort of with drawings of pirates on their desk and paintings hung up everywhere with tropical settings and documents being passed around about what pirates were. These games are an opportunity for us to sink our teeth into a really interesting creative problem.
Okay, so I think with that, we'll bring this episode to a close. Darby, thank you so much again for your time. I know the fans and I really appreciate it. You can keep up with Darby on Twitter at twitter.com/Darby McDevitt. Also his website at darbymcdevitt.com. Be sure to also check out his Q&A series that he did recently on acinitiates.com as well. As for me, you can keep up with future podcasts and other AC videos by subscribing here at youtube.com/Loomer979. And you can also find me on Twitter and Facebook at Loomer979 as well. So thanks for listening, and I'll see you next episode.